So after a season that started with Super Bowl expectations, the Jets are now 3-8 after the 28-27 loss to the Colts. Let's bring in the publisher of Jets Confidential magazine, Dan Leberfeld, to help us break down the latest debacle here. And Dan, thanks for joining us. Let's start there. How did we get to this point where the Jets season is effectively over and we can finally put any of those possible playoff holdout hopes to bed here?
Well, I think two big factors in terms of how this season went south. Number one, the defense was way overrated entering the year. They couldn't stop the run last year. They can't stop the run this year. It's an outdated scheme. When you think about this scheme, it goes back to Pete Carroll in Seattle. And Pete Carroll didn't even use this system his last 2 years with the Seahawks. So it's a bad defense to allow a quarterback who entered this game, Anthony Richardson, with 44% completion percentage, to march down the field on two 70-yard touchdown drives in the fourth quarter is unbelievable. If you saw Anthony Richardson's last game, you wouldn't have thought he was capable of this. But guys, wide open. It's a bad system. They need to churn the roster a little bit on defense. The other issue is the offensive line. The offensive tackles, Morgan Moses is the last man standing because Tyron Smith is hurt, but two older tackles that are breaking down, and Morgan Moses did not have a good game today. Tyron Smith didn't play. So here's the thing with Aaron Rodgers. Everyone wants to attack him and blame him. He can still succeed in this league, but he can't put a team on his back. He needs a good offensive line and a good defense, and he has neither right now.
All right, I want to push back on the defense for a second here, because since Jeff Ulbrich took over, the Jets defense is giving up like 11 more points per game than they were when Robert Saleh was still the head coach of this team. Did they pull the plug too early on Saleh and his head coaching tenure there?
I don't think so. I mean, I'm not into firing coaches, so I'm not saying I would have fired him, but based on the fact they did, I can analyze it here. They had an accountability problem. And also, you want to look back at the beginning of the year in terms of how they were playing defense. That San Francisco opener, their run defense was horrendous, just like it was last year, just like it's been most of this year. They play a front that is too static, too easy for opposing offensive coordinators to dial up good runs to attack it, too undersized up front. So I think the problem is this, as far as why their season has really spiraled out of control after the firing of Robert Saleh. They did too many things at the same time. Look at the New Orleans Saints and the fact that they fired their head coach, Dennis Allen. They went with Rizzi, a local guy from New Jersey, as the head coach, and they've won 2 games in a row. All they did was fire the head coach. They didn't demote the offensive coordinator. They didn't make a trade for a receiver in the middle of the season in Adams. They didn't beg Reddick to come back when he clearly didn't want to play for them. I think it was too much change at the same time, and it really disrupted the clubhouse, and it really disrupted the karma of this team.
All right, so you mentioned that you think Rodgers can still get it done if he's got the pieces around him. But as you just said, they went out and they got Reddick this offseason. They added Devontae Adams. We know they have Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall. What can this team do next year? Because Rodgers said this week that he wants to play again next year. What can this team do to try and get better next year?
Well, they've got to improve the offensive line. Clearly, the plan to go with 33-year-old tackles coming off injury-plagued seasons was a bad idea because both the players broke down. So they have Fashanu at one tackle, left tackle, that should be good there. They have to find a young right tackle. Maybe he's in the building, maybe in the draft. So they need to make sure Rodgers has a much better offensive line than he had this year. And on defense, they've got to change the system. I don't know who the coach is going to be. It's hard to know at this point, but they can't play this system anymore. It doesn't work. It's too predictable. Look at what Anthony Richardson did today. The only way Anthony Richardson was going to have a lot of success if there were guys wide open.
Yeah.
He's not a full field reader. He's not great at his progressions yet. His completion percentage is bad, but guys were wide open. When did they ever cover Pittman in this game, Joe?
Yeah, I'm not sure, and they definitely got hurt on that last drive with that. I think it was a 38, 39-yard completion. Before we let you go, quickly here, Ulbrich, is he back? He got the vote of confidence from Rodgers and Adams.
I don't know. They're going to have to do a lot better down the stretch for him to turn that interim tag into full-time head coach. So unless he does a really good job and they string together some wins down the stretch, it's going to be hard for them to bring him back next year.
And then they can start over with a 41-year-old quarterback and a new head coach. At least it's something to watch down the stretch.
You know what you do, Joe?
Go ahead.
Let me just jump in here, Joe. You know what you do? You go back to what Leon Hess did at the end of his ownership. You go out. He hired Bill Parcells, threw him the car keys and said, you run the football operation. Look at Denver with Sean Payton.
Yeah.
They did that. Woody Johnson needs to do that. Hire a really good football man and get out of the way.
All right, we'll see if that actually becomes a reality. At least we got something to watch down the stretch. Dan Leberfeld of Jets Confidential, thanks so much for the time, bud.
Anytime, Joe. Always a pleasure.